Always choose to talk.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Typically associated in international media with political instability, disease, poverty, corruption, dictatorships, and a lack of human rights and democracy, African countries struggle to deconstruct the stereotypes. One of the few exceptions seems to be the Republic of Ghana. Having gained its independence from the UK in 1957, Ghana today, at least on the surface, is enjoying political stability, with a multi-ethnic population coming together in peaceful democratic elections. But why is Ghana so different from its neighbours in this respect? And how has the country managed to solve social and political problems the rest of Africa is dealing with, or is there still work to be done here? We will find out as Nana Akufo-Addo, President of Ghana, talks to Al Jazeera. President Akufo-Addo, very warm welcome to talk to Al Jazeera.
It's nice of you to have me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Africa, going through a lot of developments at the moment, many of the countries, seismic changes for some. If you look at what's happening in Zimbabwe, DRC, Togo on your border, the state capture in South Africa. So there's lots to talk about there as an African leader. But let's first talk about the domestic issues and how your country stands out against many of these countries because it's considered so successful. Why is that?
Well, as you know, we were the first of the sub-Saharan African countries that had suffered colonialism to get free 60 years ago. So that sort of has conditioned the development of our country. And then the first 3 or so decades after independence were very turbulent and volatile. We went through all kinds of issues, one-party state under Kwame Nkrumah, a succession of military governments. And I think that by the beginning of the 90s, especially with what had happened with the downfall of the Soviet system, was a strong recognition in Ghana that really we needed to go down the path of democratic engagement. And that decision having been taken in 1992, we had the first of our 7 elections that we have held. And the determination of the Ghanaian people to go through democratic principles and values has meant that election after election has been stronger in terms of its credibility and its transparency. And it has also meant that the willingness of the population to accept the results of our electoral concept has heightened.
But how did you get it right when so many countries are struggling with that concept?
Because we had
passing power on,
because we had
letting
our
it filter down to the people.
Because we had our problems early. We were the first, and so we had the problems first of what is the kind of system. And after, as I said, after the turbulence, after the volatility of the first 30-odd years after independence, the people of Ghana, because at the end of the day, it is they that really determine the evolution and the outcome of events, made up their mind that they wanted democratic government, they were determined on the multi-party state, and they would insist that we, the political actors, also act within. So 3 times in Ghana's recent history, we've had changes of government from opposition to government, or government to opposition. And it has been done in a context which has allowed peace to flourish in the country, and also for principles of democratic accountability.
So if you put it that way, I mean, do you look at a country like Zimbabwe, we've seen the military step in and take over basically. I mean, do you think that eventually it'll rise like the Phoenix 2 once it goes through some of the processes that you did? Or is this a totally different story and there are different factors at play here?
I think that at the end of the day it will also. The determination to engage democratic values, I believe will triumph in Zimbabwe. It's a pity that the current political situation has degenerated to the extent that the army is finding itself to come directly into play.
Is that ever a solution?
It can never be a long-term solution. Obviously, it can never be a long-term solution. But I have not got enough information about what actually took place and why this situation has evolved for me to be able to say this is my position or the position of Ghana.
How important is it for stakeholders then to get involved in the democratic process in a country like Ghana? I mean, you've got different tribes, you've got different ethnic groups, you've got different religions. How do you make sure that everybody feels that they are involved in the democratic process, in the education system, that they're all benefiting equally?
First of all, the insistence. The political parties in Ghana have a national and not an ethnic coloration. Has been very important. The two main parties in Ghana are well represented in all parts of the country. They have their strongholds. They have regional or ethnic strongholds. No two ways about that. But nevertheless, the coverage, the reach of the parties is truly national. The language of our constitution is also insistent on a national response to it. You have all kinds of principles in the constitution, directive principles that insist on the Ghanaian as against the regional or ethnic response to events. But then I keep coming back to the experience of our people who have gone through some very difficult times in the past, a lot of turbulence, and have now decided that they want democracy, they want democratic. And I think that when you have that bedrock, it provides the contours, the context, which then determines state action and the response of state action.
And how stable is that bedrock? On your border, you've got Togo, it's got massive problems there, demonstrations, trying to overthrow the president. Obviously, you've got strong ties with the country, you've got a refugee situation happening. Are you worried that that could provoke some sort of instability in the country, that it could stir any tensions?
You have to be worried. Of course you have to. You cannot be complacent. I mean, I remember vividly 12 years ago when the father of the current president died, the first President Eyadema died, and there was a crisis in the succession. And the issues that emerged from there meant that 100,000 Togolese came across the border to settle in Ghana. Some are still there, they never went back. It is true that the people who live on the border of Togo and Ghana are essentially the same people.
But is it a Togo problem? I mean, Ghana's been accused of meddling in the past. Is it something that should be dealt with internally?
It has to be dealt with by the Togolese. We will do whatever we can to assist. They're a brother and a neighbor, and they say that when your neighbor's house is on fire, the intelligent thing is to help them put it out before the fire consumes you. So we're doing that. We're playing a role in trying to see to what extent dialogue and discussions can take place amongst the main actors, so that a solution, a peaceful solution, can be found. But they have a peculiar history, and it's that history that is playing itself out now. But I'm confident that if you like, the march of democracy in Africa is something that's going to be very difficult to reverse. Largely because...
Do you think democracy represents different things to different people? And is that the way it should be perceived?
I see for me it has universal appeal. It has to do with freedom of expression. It has to do with freedom of association. It has to do with having the capacity peacefully to change government. If you put somebody there, if they are no good, 4 or 5 years later, you can go up to the ballot, put your ballot there and change them. And to have that, I think all people relish that power and relish that opportunity. I mean, take South Africa, which has been a strong force for democracy on the continent ever since apartheid was disbanded. Even though you've had a party with almost overwhelming support in the country. That party was very careful not to close the democratic space in terms of freedom.
But look at it now, what's happening. I mean, you're seeing a system that is being, some people say it's changing, it's been raped, it's been abused. I mean, is this also one of the problems of liberation parties? Is that...
It's changing. It has to change. I don't think that the ANC could, and even those who lead it, could think that they would have the predominance they have in South African political life forever. That would be absurd. At some stage or another, the mechanics and the dynamics of development would mean new alliances would form, new arrangements, new political configurations would emerge.
And do you think the mechanics are strong enough in South Africa? I know there's a strong judiciary and independent media at this stage. Are those factors strong enough, do you think, to keep the checks and balances?
One would hope so, because you don't hear a language of those who think that another system would serve South African interests better. You hear people say, the president is no good, this is no good, this is no good. Fair enough. But I think that the attachment to the values that underpin democratic engagement, I feel that those are very strong in South Africa. And I feel that they're strong.
Proud of Africa, Pan-Africa, a strong Africa. When you see what's happening in countries like Kenya, the voting process, the electoral process that seem to have gone through great difficulties at the moment, South Africa and Zimbabwe, does it worry you when you see that coming out?
It worries, but at the same time, for me, I think that we all have at the end of the day also to be historians and to recognize that the evolution of democracy, even in the areas of the world where it has been consolidated, in Western Europe and in America, went through many stages and many events, and some of them very turbulent and potentially destructive of democracy. But they were able, on the end of the day, to overcome it, and the systems and the principles and the institutions that have been established are now so very strong that it becomes difficult to contemplate their being set aside. Even today in Europe, the events that are occurring with these populist right-wing movements that are taking place, some of whom's undertones are certainly anti-democratic, but they're still taking place within the democratic space. I think because the institutions of European democracy are now very strongly entrenched within the body politic of the various nation states of Europe. I believe that the problems that we're seeing on our continent, I'm not saying we have to be complacent and think that, it's happened elsewhere, so we should just sit back and no, it will happen to us. But we need to work at it. We need those of us who are attached to it have to be active.
Can I pick up, on something you said a little earlier on about freedom of expression? So I want to ask you about what is happening in your country and homosexuality, for example, which I believe is illegal and it's punishable. Why is homosexuality still illegal in your country?
The social, cultural issues, if you like. I don't believe that in Ghana so far a sufficiently strong coalition has emerged, which is having that impact on public opinion that will say, change it. Let's then have a new paradigm in Ghana.
Is that something you would get behind?
I think that it is something that is bound to happen. And when that happens...
What's going to provoke it? What's going to make it happen?
It's the activity, like elsewhere in the world. The activities of individuals, of groups. I grew up in England. I went to school as a young boy in England, and I grew up at a time in England when homosexuality was banned there. It was illegal, and I lived a period when British politicians thought it was anathema even to think about changing the law, and then suddenly the activities of individuals, of groups, a certain awareness, a certain development grew and grew and grew stronger, and it forced a change in law. I believe that those are the same processes that will bring about changes in our situation. At the moment, I don't see that in Ghana there is that strong current of opinion that is saying this is something that we need to even deal with. It's not. It doesn't. It's not so far a matter which is on the agenda.
Let me ask you about something you've tweeted about. You say critically, men and boys must take responsibility to say no more child marriage. How big a problem is that
It's a big problem
in the country, and why do you think it's still there? Is it an education issue or
obviously educational, stroke cultural? It's a matter. You have also the economic difficulties that force people to behave in a certain sort of way. But these are matters that we are determined to try and do something about. We're doing. It's a big
because it has a devastating impact on society, doesn't it?
It does indeed. There's a big campaign to raise awareness on it. There's a determination to ensure that the laws are enforced. And the general awareness of the society also on the matter is growing stronger and stronger. So we're in a stronger and stronger position to deal with it. We have other matters of equal concern. Child marriage is there. There's also human trafficking, which is very much a function of conditions of poverty, of extreme poverty, unfortunately, in some parts of the country, and therefore also lend themselves to criminal syndicates who prey in those circumstances to organize
it's obviously devastating, isn't it? I know that your wife is very involved in fighting HIV/AIDS, or she's very outspoken about it. How big a problem is it in Ghana? And do you think that African countries are doing enough to defeat this?
I'm not sure on a matter like this I can speak on a continental scale.
Right, because it's not really one size fits all, is it?
Yes, it isn't, okay. And I wouldn't want to. But I think that we're making a good fist of it in Ghana. The prevalence rates are declining. The awareness of the issues is very strong. It's much stronger in Ghana today than it was, say, 10 years ago. And all of that is part of the response that there's been to government's determination to make it an issue for people, around which people can then
to get to talk about it, remove the stigma.
Yeah, it's been important, but it's something that we cannot sort of sleep on. We have to continually be active and work at it.
So I see you are quite active on Twitter, and I see that you met Donald Trump and another man.
Yes.
I'm happy to say your tweets are very different. What do you think of him?
Well, there's the figure on television and what you read about. It's a volatile picture that you get of somebody because he seems to change views. But then there's a person that we met. I was with a group of African leaders during the last UN General Assembly in September in New York. About 8 or 9 of us were invited by him to lunch. And the impression that he conveyed, the sense of himself that we all got was very different from the public image that we had. First of all, a certain humility. You know, he walked in, I don't know too much about your place, and I've called you here for you to tell me a little bit so I can know a little bit more. I just have one, he made the statement, I have 1 or 2 friends who've gone there and may have come to your countries and made lots of money.
Yes.
And congratulate you for that.
Yeah.
Congratulate you for that. But the attitude that he showed at that lunch, I think most of the people, and there were some very wise, and I'm one of the newest in the leadership circle in Africa. I've been there, 10 months? But some of them who had been there for a long time, I could see were significantly surprised, positively so, by his manner.
When it comes to Africa, do you think Donald Trump will be good for Africa? Obviously, he touts his America First policy. You seem to have negated what a lot of people thought, that possibly he doesn't know much about Africa, that he's not going to be good for Africa. Where do you think that relationship will go? And could it be a healthy competitor to China?
The America First, I mean, that resonance is not something that is necessarily negative as far as I'm concerned, because I think that when you are the leader of a nation, that has to be your concern, the interests of your people and your country first. And I think that what we on the continent are also required to do at all times is to define for ourselves what are our interests, what are our goals, and what are the instruments we need to assemble to be able to prosecute and realize these goals.
And do you think it's a healthy balance? I mean, do you think Africa is able to retain enough of what it needs when it comes to the big players like the US and China?
Maybe, because at the end of the day, even the period of liberation was undoubtedly helped by the Cold War reality of the West and the Soviet bloc. So to that extent too, I think, yes, there could be a positive aspect of it for us, this competition between the two great players of the moment, which allows us also to chart our own independent response to what we need to do to develop our continent.
You also tweeted that you believe it's time for Africa to come of age and hold its rightful place on the world stage. This Africa will be neither a victim nor a pawn. This Africa will be honest to itself and to the world. I mean, do you think it's ready for that now? And how does Africa achieve that?
It has to be, because the caricature of us as either pawns or victims does nothing for
really
our self-respect. Yes, it does nothing for our self-respect or self-confidence.
Through Africa's own fault, or because of the story that's been told about Africa? Do you think there's a misunderstanding?
No, to some extent there's an element of fault. If you're weak, people will take advantage of you. And that's what we have been for a long time, weak. Take the issue that has become a big issue for us in Ghana. 60 years after independence, we are still dependent on so-called donor support to finance important parts of our budget: health, education. That surely is an unacceptable situation for any self-respecting.
Do you think a big government will correct the balance?
I think that the balance is corrected by policy, is corrected by internal mobilization, it's corrected by a focus that really that's an intolerable situation and we should be in a position to finance our own development.
Let me just ask you about your big government. 48 ministers, 4 ministers of state, 60 deputy ministers. I believe it's the largest government in Africa. What is the thinking behind that? Because I know that many people do look at Ghana and say, right, when it comes to transparency and corruption matters, you are ranking very low. So how does this all fit together, and where do you see Ghana in 10 years from now?
The big government, as you call it, is because we need that capacity. You have weak institutional structures. You have civil service and public services whose enthusiasm for moving things in a particular direction may not be as strong as they should be, and therefore to have a political hand on it that is saying this is where we're going and this is where we're determined to go is extremely important. 10 years from now, I'm looking at a Ghana that has much greater self-confidence, a Ghana that is now financing its own activities, has reduced considerably its dependence on aid because its economy is working. The private sector of our country is growing stronger and stronger, and the arrangements that we need to make with the outside world are increasingly arrangements that are on our terms. The Ghana that we're looking at is the Ghana that has come of age. 10 years' time will be Ghana 70 years from independence. We should by that time be really standing on our own feet. I have a great deal of confidence that Ghana is within reach. Is within reach because of the focus that we're trying to bring to national development. I think that if that focus succeeds, in 10 years' time, I'm not sure that I'll be around for us to review this discussion, but I think that in that time, the image and the framework within which people look at Ghana and see it will be radically different.
President of Ghana, Akufo-Addo, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.